In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maryland, 2012, Maria Jenkins had always been known as the perfect wife and mother. She was dedicated to her husband, Richard, and their two children, giving everything to build a stable, loving home. But behind the pristine exterior of their family life, Maria had been harboring a painful secret. Her husband was cheating. She had known about the affair for months, and while she once considered forgiving him for the sake of their children, it was becoming impossible. Richard was unrepentant, and Maria was about to put an end to it, publicly. Maria Jenkins had always been the type of woman who believed in the strength of family. Growing up in a small town, she had watched her parents' marriage survive the ups and downs of life, and she wanted the same for herself. Her mother, a soft-spoken yet resilient woman, had once told her that love wasn't just about the good times, but about staying together through the storms. Those words had shaped Maria's understanding of marriage, and for the longest time, she had clung to that belief, even when things began to unravel in her own life. She met Richard in the late 90s, right after graduating from college. He was charming, ambitious, and promised her a life filled with love and adventure. For years, it seemed like that promise was being fulfilled. They bought a home in Maryland, had two beautiful children, and built a life that Maria cherished. She became a stay-at-home mother, devoting her time to their children, Sophie and Liam, while Richard worked long hours to provide for them. Maria saw herself as the foundation of their family, holding everything together so that their children could grow up in a safe, nurturing environment. But over time, things changed. By the time 2011 came around, Maria noticed subtle shifts in Richard's behavior. He seemed more distracted, and there were times when he would come home late, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. At first, she tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the stress of his job, or maybe just her overactive imagination. After all, Richard had never given her any reason to doubt his loyalty. He was a good father to their kids. And while their marriage wasn't perfect, Maria thought they were solid. But then the signs became harder to ignore. He was spending more time on his phone, keeping it close to him like a secret. When they went to bed, he would often turn away from her, scrolling through messages late into the night. Their conversations had grown strained, more surface level than they had ever been. The intimacy that had once flowed so naturally between them had withered, replaced by a cold distance Maria couldn't quite explain. It was on January 5th, 2012, that everything changed. Maria had been doing the usual household chores, trying to keep her mind off the nagging feeling that something was wrong. As she sorted through the mail, she noticed a credit card bill that was much higher than normal. Curiosity tugged at her, and against her better judgment, she decided to look through the statements. That was when she found them, the hotel receipts. Her hands trembled as she scanned the charges. They weren't just for one night. There were multiple transactions over the course of the last few months, all at the same hotel, a place Richard had no reason to be. The reality of what was happening slowly began to sink in, but Maria didn't act immediately. She knew she needed more than a gut feeling or some suspicious charges to confront him. In the following weeks, Maria began quietly investigating. She checked his phone when he was asleep, careful not to leave any trace of her searches. She found messages, ones that confirmed what she had feared. Richard was seeing another woman. The pain hit her like a tidal wave, but still, she didn't confront him. Instead, she began collecting evidence. Photos of him leaving their house at odd hours, conversations between him and the woman, even a few times when he slipped up and left work early. By the time February came around, Maria had more than enough proof, but the thought of destroying their family kept her silent a little longer. She still loved Richard, or at least the version of him she had once known. She didn't want to break up their home, and part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would come to his senses and realize what he was doing before it was too late. On February 15th, after weeks of sleepless nights and growing frustration, Maria finally decided to confront him. The kids had gone to bed, and the house was quiet, the only sound being the faint hum of the heater as it pushed warmth through the vents. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she approached Richard, who was sitting in the living room, oblivious to what was coming. She had rehearsed the conversation in her head 1,000 times, but when she opened her mouth to speak, the words tumbled out awkwardly. Richard's reaction was everything she feared. At first, he denied it. He claimed she was overreacting, that there was nothing going on, and that he had been working late or meeting with clients. But when Maria laid out the evidence she had gathered, there was no escaping the truth. He broke down and begged for forgiveness, blaming stress at work, blaming the pressures of life. Maria, though hurt, felt a flicker of hope that maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. But things only got worse. In the weeks that followed, Richard's attitude shifted. Instead of working to repair their marriage, he became cold and defensive. When Maria brought it up again, hoping for some sign of remorse, he turned the tables, accusing her of pushing him away. He blamed her for being too focused on the kids, for not giving him enough attention. By the third confrontation, it was clear Richard wasn't sorry. He wasn't going to stop. And now, he was making Maria feel like she was the problem. For weeks, Maria battled with herself. She couldn't sleep, her mind constantly replaying the arguments, the betrayal, and the future of her children. Sophie and Liam were her world, and she didn't want to break up their family. But every time she looked at Richard, she saw the lies, the deceit, and the lack of remorse. The breaking point came on March 3rd. Maria had been at the grocery store, running errands like any normal day. But when she came home, Sophie ran up to her, asking about something strange she had seen earlier. While Maria was away, Richard had brought another woman, Lisa, into their home. Sophie, just 6 years old, had seen them in the living room, sitting too close, hugging. The innocence of the question broke Maria's heart. Her daughter didn't understand what was happening, but the image was enough to shatter any hope Maria had of saving her marriage. This was no longer about a mistake. Richard had crossed a line, bringing his affair into their home, into the lives of their children. That night, as Maria lay awake in bed, she realized that the only way forward was to make a plan. She would gather every piece of evidence she could, and when the time was right, she would expose him for who he truly was. There would be no more second chances. This was the beginning of the end for Richard Jenkins. By early March, Maria Jenkins had reached the point of no return. The betrayal she had once tried to forgive had now evolved into something deeper, an unshakable resolve to reclaim her life. For years, she had sacrificed everything to build a home, a family, and a life she thought was safe. But Richard, the man she once trusted, had turned that life into a lie. He no longer just hurt her. He had disrespected their home, and worst of all, brought his betrayal into their children's lives. That was something Maria could not forgive. On the night of March 6th, as Richard left for another business trip, Maria sat quietly at the kitchen table. Her hands gripped her coffee cup as her thoughts swirled. She no longer cried. She had shed all the tears she could. Now she was clear-headed, determined. She had made up her mind to gather undeniable proof that would not only expose Richard, but ensure he would lose everything. Her mind was already set on the upcoming family reunion, a yearly event that would bring everyone together. That would be the perfect stage to reveal the truth. Maria's plan was methodical. She purchased hidden cameras online, small enough to be disguised as ordinary objects. One camera was carefully tucked into a decorative clock on the bedroom dresser, another placed within a photo frame in the living room. She made sure the angles were perfect, capturing everything without drawing attention. There would be no risk of discovery. Every moment Richard and Lisa spent in their home together would be recorded. In addition to the cameras, Maria discreetly placed a voice recorder in Richard's briefcase, one that would activate with sound, picking up every whispered conversation, every incriminating phone call. She knew his routine well by now. Richard was careless, thinking Maria had grown tired of confronting him. He believed her silence meant she had accepted his infidelity. He couldn't have been more wrong. Over the following weeks, Maria distanced herself emotionally from Richard. She stopped trying to engage him in conversation and spent more time with the children. She made herself scarce, giving him the freedom to carry on his affair without interruption. Her absence fueled his arrogance, and with each passing day, Richard grew bolder in his behavior. Maria watched silently as he brought Lisa into their home again and again, thinking no one would ever find out. But every time they entered the house, the cameras captured it all, every touch, every word.